Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who's about to learn what it's like to podcast with a sober co-host.
Tim Longo. Yeah, you had that one primed up. Yeah.
Yep, well, we're recording during the day, and of course I'm kidding. I'm not sober.
Yeah, this will be an adventure for us all. See how well you do.
See how well I do, during the day when it's daylight. It's pretty weird for me.
It is.
How'd you feel about all your Vorknixes and Yilitats this time? This is quite the alphabet soup this time out. It's getting progressively stranger in the naming. It's something we've called on before. We're, of course, discussing TIE Fighter. This is going to be our fourth and final episode discussing the game directly.
Definitely word jumble, or letter jumble.
Scrabble bag.
A lot of different people's anagrams for different people's names and their families, probably, and just kind of switching things, putting them backwards, But
the one that really stuck with me was Vorknix, which is like this key element. It's this like cloaking device technology. I guess it's the ship that's carrying the technology, technically, that it's being hooked into or something like that, which was, kind of a weird thing, So I guess, to set up the story, this basically is going back after Zarin.
Mm-hmm.
And Thrawn is involved. And the kind of high level overview is Thrawn is still chasing after Zarin, you're coming up on Endor, which is kind of cool, and there's some good stuff there we can talk about.
I love that stuff, yeah.
And then finally at the end, the noose is tightening around Zarin. They've kind of, gotten him in this one quadrant or whatever, and they're going to find him and get to him. Through all of that, there's a new technology that they're talking about, which is this cloaking device that they're developing that is going to be part of the Vorknix ship. I guess is what they're testing. And it's ridiculous. They pronounce it, but it's VORK NKX. So I don't know how they get to Vorknix, but whatever. When I first saw that in text, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Anyway, so they finally draw Zarin out. They use Thrawn as bait to draw Zarin out, and he goes after the Vorknix ship, and the game. That's kind of the final mission. So that's kind of the high level overview of the story.
And they draw him out, and they also kind of there's kind of a cool. I think we'll both be talking about our experiences with the very, very end, but there's a cool little bait and switch where Thrawn basically he installs a tracking device inside the ship. It's a Krillian Corvette, I think, is the ship, the Vorknix. And there's a tracking device in there, but also the technology that the cloaking technology is also unstable, it turns out. And so by the time Zarin thinks he's getting away because he has the only ship essentially in the galaxy that can cloak, it's somehow has some sort of reaction to when it's triggered in close proximity to hyperdrive triggering, the two of them combine to explode.
Yes. So
it's hilarious switcheroo that Thrawn comes up with to take him out finally. And as a side note, somebody who has obviously worked with the Star Wars universe for a long time and a little too deeply, probably I might add, cloaking technology is a pretty mysterious and verboten thing in the galaxy, in the canon. It's a thing that really doesn't exist. And
that was actually the first note I made, which was like, this is not this is not a Star Wars thing for me. I was like, that's a Star Trek thing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's definitely not, and it's something that would always come up from time to time. Like we even talked about it on Republic Commando, where it's like, or do we want to have an ability where you can, cloak a la Halo or something like that? And it just is something that Star Wars is sort of a low tech science fiction, or tries to be most of the time, and other than the space magic, and it just doesn't fit. And so I forgot where they were going with this whole thing, and then was glad by the end that it ended up being this sort of technology that was never quite stable and kind of off limits and did not really live beyond this. So hopefully they were talking about this at the time and wanted to stick to that sort of canon. But yeah, cloaking is just not a thing in Star Wars.
Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely a fictional thing that leapt right out at me. I couldn't remember. I was like, was there something I forgot, like in Jedi? I was like, were they cloaked and I forgot that? Like, I don't remember that being a thing.
Yeah.
And I was also kind of glad to find it, not turn out to be a thing. I thought it was like just really nuts there for a minute.
And there's probably extended universe stuff that, obviously, like it's probably somebody else has dealt with it, and somebody will probably call me on that it does exist someplace in some random, piece of fiction, but in general it's one of those carrots on the sticks that no one generally gets to. It may have ended up in the Clone Wars show or the Rebel show or something like that, but it's very it's very minimal if it ever does show up.
All right. So what do you think of these missions?
I didn't enjoy the gameplay as much as I wanted to, but I did enjoy the sort of backdrop of it all. The Endor stuff, to talk more specifically about that, the way they bring in Endor for those who haven't been playing was kind of cool for me, being a sort of uber geek, in that they give context to the backstory or before the events leading up to the Battle of Endor, where, as we know, spoiler for those who have not watched Return of the Jedi, it's a trap, and so it supports how it is a trap, and there's some key things that happen in these missions that they obviously made up, that have nothing to do with the actual movie, and the concept of keeping the fact that battle, actually the Emperor has set a trap for the rebels, and keeping that a secret from the rebels. And there's a chance through some of these missions where the rebels, at least actually one of the rebel commanders actually did get that information, but we catch him in this game before he gets to the rest of the rebels to tell them that it's a trap.
Right.
And I think Vader takes him out and kills him or imprisons him. And so
so I bet you did it differently then. This might be a branch.
Oh.
Because for me, that was actually a bonus goal. There was a shuttle with a computer programmer on it. Mm-hmm. That if you scan it, it identifies that he's the guy who knows about the Death Star's.
I did scan it, but I blew it up.
Okay, yeah. All right. So, yeah, that's the same thing. And then they say Vader. So, like, the cutscene then basically covers the fact that you might not have. Because the cutscene says, that it basically says Vader's taking care of that aspect when it's really you. But if you had missed that, it would just be Vader saying, I made sure that our secret was safe.
They kept it vague, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. So it works either way. But that was a moment that I thought was particularly great. There was also, and there was a mission where you had to scan a number of rebel ships that you were not supposed to engage.
Yeah, that was a cool one too.
Which was also good, because they were, I don't know what those are. Are those Corellian ships? I don't like. Or those
Calamari cruisers.
Calamari cruisers, right? Yeah. That's the one. And you have to scan each of them, inspect each of them, and one of them's got Akbar on it, and it's really good, it's a surprise moment, and I think for me it was the first one I scanned, and it just made me laugh. I mean, I just was not expecting that. It just gave me a kind of a moment of joy of like, oh yeah, here I am. I'm in the Star Wars universe, in a really good way. The recognizable Star Wars universe. I mean, not the Vorknix one.
Well, and then there's actually, I guess Vader doesn't fly in a mission with you in any of these tours of duty.
No, but Thrawn does.
But Thrawn does, and the Emperor does, right?
That's right.
That mission where
he's on his yacht.
His yacht, which is a hilarious-looking ship. Doesn't look Star Warsy to me at all.
No.
Looks more like 2001 or something. But the fact that Thrawn actually, he gets into a shuttle, right, to escape, I think?
No, he's out there as if he's going to try to escape because the battle's not going well, in theory.
But I think he might.
But he's out there as bait to draw out Zarin.
Oh, okay.
The thinking is it's a psychological game. I'm going to get out there and Zarin's going to want to come for me, and that's how that's how that plays, or it's supposed to play, because that mission I played it 3 times, and all 3 times it was broken.
Oh, you're talking about the final one?
The final one, and I don't know why. I mean, I think in one case, Thrawn's shuttle was blown up, and I didn't notice, but it didn't fail me, which was weird. So that's just a plain bug. It was kind of a shame to have basically the last mission of the game be, for me, uncompletable, because it was bugged 3 different ways. That was just frustrating.
I mean, this is
because I did very well, and I defended them, and I was using my wingman. Like, I went and read what to do. It was the only a couple of missions here that I ever need to use my wingman, but this was one. I had another one, which I'll get to in a minute. But yeah, I was super frustrated. I was just like, you've got to be kidding me, because it's 15 minutes, to do it again, 15 and maybe even 20. Well, there was one time where it's like, okay, well, I think I've done everything. This was the second time I'd done it. And I just, zeroed out my throttle, and I left, and I went and took a shower, I came back, and it was, 35 minutes had gone by, and nothing had advanced. And I'm like, what is going on? So that was just weird.
Yeah, that happened to me, that one mission, right? Last episode or something, where,
yep.
Yeah, I felt like technically that's an A-bug.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Which is
rare
in LucasArts games generally. I mean, there's always a possibility that these are performance related as well. Because when
missing a frame or something.
Yeah, or whatever. I mean, just or that the game is running too fast and things happen that shouldn't have happened. I think I'd mentioned to you once before that playing the Indiana Jones game you worked on, which was
Infernal Machine,
that if you use a machine gun in that game on a modern computer, the game crashes because it's going so fast. The bullets are going so fast it crashes.
I forgot. If you told me that, I forgot. That's hilarious.
Yeah, I think I told you a long time ago. I don't think it's come up on the podcast, but so you can go and now you've got this, and you need to use that because you've got all these Nazis that are coming after you because they expect you're going to use a machine gun.
Machine gun fires so fast.
The frame rate is so high. If you're playing on a modern machine.
Yeah.
So, sometimes things like that happen, and there's no way to prevent. There's no way to know that's gonna happen. I mean,
no,
I don't necessarily think that the Infernal Machine engine was very solid to begin with, but this certainly was, right? I mean, this engine shipped any number of games, and it's possible, that it just. I can't imagine that they wouldn't have seen this bug.
It was probably, if you're right, and not to jump down this rabbit hole for too long, but then it was probably some sort of scripting related bug, don't you think? In that there was some check that was trying to happen, and I guess the one thing I will say, and this isn't necessarily to to keep the blame on the developers, even though the platform has changed out from underneath them on this version that we're playing. But there are ways that you can script that are a little more performance agnostic.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Rather than checking if Thrawn's alive every frame or whatever, you know what I mean? Like there's something that is very performant dependent on the way that you're going to check it on a regular interval that would have been more foolproof on an older platform. But nobody thinks about future-proofing their games that way at the time, right?
You're certainly
worried
not
about that.
Yeah, it was a few years later actually that Ernest Adams actually wrote it up in a column in Game Developer about how you need to start thinking about writing your games in such a way that they're going to be okay when the machines are 8 times as fast or 16 times as fast, because that's going to happen very, very quickly. And he was very proud of the fact that I think he was maybe the lead on Dungeon Keeper 3D, which was effectively the same as the first or second game, but was now with a real 3D engine, a hardware accelerated engine. But it ran using time deltas instead of assuming a frame rate, which was what the original had done. So when you play some of these older, DOS-based games, often you play them in a DOS emulated environment, even though your PC could probably handle it, and you run something called MoSlow, which slows down how quickly the game runs for exactly that reason. Because back in the day, nobody was expecting that you would have a possibility of 1,000 frames per second or whatever, and the games just would run too fast. Like you can't play them because they're running too fast. Yeah. So
it's an interesting conundrum in the age of Steam, where I feel like I think this is a good example because Disney / Lucas are just kind of they're just re-releasing these things willy nilly and putting them on Steam because there is a platform, but there's no. I would be surprised if they even did any QA on these re-releases, if they did very minimally, and there's nobody there to fix the bugs anyway. Right. So they're just kind of quick cash-ins, but yeah, Ernest, that's funny. I'm glad he wrote that article, man, because it's really not something people really worry about, right? You're just so worried about shipping the game on the platform your current spec.
And at the time it was starting to become. I mean, I think that was like when MoSlow started to appear. And you would run this thing that would limit your game to 30 frames a second, which is something, any good Quake player would be like, why would you do that? I want to be 1,000 frames a second in Quake. But for some games that were not written, with that in mind, you were just kind of screwed. Yeah. I actually noticed that I played those Ultima games last year, and if you don't run them, to be slowed down, they will go very, very, very fast. Yeah. Because they time out. It's turn-based, but turns time out. So.
So it just.
Yeah, so it'll just advance, and time will just go by, and you won't know. And so a creature might just walk up to you, and stuff like that. So you have to really pay attention.
It's interesting, you think. I mean, obviously they have plenty on their plate, I'm sure, but you'd think that Valve would think about a way to integrate that into Steam to emulate a certain era of a PC. That seemed like it'd be a valuable thing. I mean, I guess it doesn't really behoove them to do that.
No, and it's harder than it sounds. I mean, you could run, I guess, a virtual machine for any title, but yeah,
put it on the publisher is probably
beyond scope for sure. And a lot of games that have come forward from the DOS era are already running in DOS emulated environments. When you buy, you can play the Ultima games on a MacBook, as I did, because they're in an emulated DOS. They're not really running on the hardware. They're running in an emulator. So, that's how you do it. But you have to be pretty old to be able to do that. I'm not sure that would entirely work with something more relatively recent, like a TIE fighter. Hard to know.
Yeah, interesting.
Deep tech questions.
Interesting topic I hadn't anticipated talking about on the podcast. And a couple of the bugs we found, it didn't even occur to me that could be performance related. I'm glad it came up though, because it's interesting bit of dev that I think maybe people don't really realize playing some of these older games.
I did have a mission failure that was my fault, but I had to replay it and I had to rethink my strategy, and that was actually a lot more interesting. So there was that cruiser Link, the Rebel cruiser,
the missing link.
The missing link. I found it, and it's captained by Lucy. There was
wow,
yeah, good.
Deep cut for all of those anthropologists out there.
Yeah. Well, we're game anthropologists. Might as well throw in.
Hey, all right, I'll take it. Good, like it.
But so that's a mission in which you have to disable this rebel cruiser. You're in the missile boat, so you're super powered, but you're just supposed to knock its shields out, and then there are some gunboats that are going to do the ion cannons because you don't have one.
Mm-hmm.
And foolishly, I just went and I shot a bunch of heavy bombs at it, and it took it all down. And then it just tore apart my gunboats because I didn't disable any of its defenses. I just hit its hull.
Yeah.
And I had to go back and play it again because I ultimately got to the point of like, oh, terrific! I have no gunboats. What do I do now? And then I was like, oh, I can request more. That's what that's for. And so I requested more. And they came out and they also got torn up. And so I was like, and I requested more and they said, I'm sorry, you can't have any more reinforcements.
Oh, it did? Yeah, I had to call reinforcements too, but I think the second round got lucky or something and they were able to do it.
So doing it again, I used the component targeting and I took out the warhead launchers that were on the sides of the ship, which was a thing in an earlier mission. So that was where they specifically said, make sure to take out the warhead launcher on this platform or whatever, so that our bombers can get close enough to destroy it, which I thought was a pretty nice, some
tactics in there, right? Interesting. Yeah, it's one of my favorite things is I got sort of probably a cross between more impatient and also more bold toward the end of these missions, or the last few missions. I love dumbfiring missiles into stuff.
Tim Longo, only you could be so bold.
They're valuable, right? You don't want to replenish and all that stuff, and it takes time. So it's not usually not worth it because you often miss, and then you waste a valuable missile. But when you're in the missile boats, like you feel like you have plenty to. So I just Oh, I wanted to ask you if you use the slam device at all either. I just use the slam device, get in really quickly, and then just dumbfire those because those missile launchers on the Calamari cruisers are enormous. They're really hard to miss. So at the risk of hitting the ship, you just kind of zoom in really quick and just dumbfire a missile into each of them and take them out really quickly.
So what is the slam?
The slam is they talk about. That's why I wanted to ask you.
Is it a beam weapon or something?
No. It's like a speed up device. It's like a boost device that's somewhere in between hyperspace and regular. It's N and so there's one mission that they actually say engage your slam, and I'd forgotten about it.
I had no idea. Yeah, that totally went over my head.
Yeah, and they actually I noticed in the mission design they had some specific missions where it might have helped you actually quite a bit. They space you quite a ways away from your target, and
there was one where I failed to scan a thing.
Yeah,
I was like, that's impossible. There's no way I could have gotten there. I put all my shields down and everything, so that all energy was to the engines.
Yep.
And it got away, and I'm like, how am I that doesn't make any sense. How could I do that?
Yeah, so if you hit N, which is obviously stands for slam,
right? Of course.
N, then it basically drains your shields in favor of the boost, and so you basically double or triple your speed until your lasers run out, and then you have to recharge your lasers, of course. So I used it once I remembered they had it, and there was one mission where they told you to do it, but you probably didn't realize what it was.
Yeah.
So I started just using that thing all the time, and then just would zoom in really quick into something, a capital ship, and just dumbfire missiles and bombs into things. It's dangerous because you can hit stuff pretty easily too. But there's just another. It's like kind of like the beam weapon, right? Like this tertiary device or mechanic that you don't use all the time, but there's times when you really need it. And I'd noticed they were starting to start you pretty far away from your target, like 10 to 20 clicks or whatever. And without the slam, it's actually pretty hard to close in on that without, losing an objective.
Yes. Well, yeah, I definitely started losing secondary objectives, and I was, fine to let them go on the basis of trying to get it done in time. But
if they weren't
in fact, I never progressed beyond the third circle of the Emperor. In that, that's as far as I was, maybe in the first episode of this series.
Oh, interesting.
And I never got any further than that. And I did bonus objectives, here and there, and sometimes I'd find ones. Like, I felt like I should have advanced. And I don't really know why. Like, there are a ton of stats in the game. I don't know if you went and looked on the pause screen, but you can actually go through and see just tons of information. It tell you all your data about all the battles you've done, all the missions you've done in terms of what score you got, and then you can look and actually see how many of each type of ship you've shot down. There's just a huge amount of statistics in that screen, which was really surprising to me. And the one I was looking for was like, how many bonus points have I scored? Because I wanted to know, like, why, where am I? What's the threshold? I have no, but I couldn't find that stat. So I'm sure obviously it's tracked. It may just not be shown you because the whole Emperor Secret Order thing is kind of meant to be special.
So didn't you find out, I think you mentioned this last episode, didn't you find out that it's related to secondary objectives only, not bonus objectives?
Secondary and bonus.
Oh, it's both. Okay.
Yeah. You get points for that stuff.
So it's interesting because
stuff gets taken away when you miss them, though. That didn't occur to me, and I'd have to research that further to say one way or the other.
Well, I got to the third circle as well, and I wasn't even doing much. And I don't know if maybe like one mission in these last three battles, I got full secondary objectives, but yeah, I didn't progress past that either. One quick before we leave on the sort of backdrop story side of it, one thing that I wanted to mention that I also liked was the whole Bothan sub-thread about all of that stuff, and it really related. And they kept pronouncing it Bothans, which I don't think is accurate. I could be wrong on that, but I think it's just Bothans. Well,
it's Hoth.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, all right, smart guy. It's not Hoth, despite what George says. Anyway, it was so interesting to have this totally unanticipated thread happening while Rogue One is out as well, where they were talking about they were talking about this was Death Star 2.
Many Bothans died, to bring us this information.
There's that, and there's just like the battle, what is it called? Battle station? No, the battle. I forget what their general term for the Death Star is, but anyway, the being fully operational, and then the whole subtext of the trap and the fact that they've tricked the rebels into thinking that Death Star 2 is not, its defenses are not online and it's not ready to fire and all this stuff. And there's such a pivotal moment in that battle in the film, and to have all that backstory with the Bothans thrown in there, I don't know. Being an uber geek of this stuff, I just really enjoyed the thoughtfulness of some of that stuff, even though the conduit for it is this space sim mission-based game where you don't really get a lot of that. It's really hard to deliver that kind of backstory in just a few VO lines, basically, and a couple cutscenes. So
I will agree. I actually think that that's actually some of my... I'm not, famously, I'm not a lore guy. Like, I don't really care about backstory a lot of the time, but I do like when that stuff is infused into the play. If it's side stuff that I've got to go and, like, I'm not a person who reads all the books in Skyrim, even having worked on it. Sorry, gang that I worked with.
You mean the in-game books?
Stuff. Right, the in-game.
Oh, geez, yeah, that's like I don't even know if I'm that far, but
and I often just don't care about who the third father of Perzikian was. I don't care, it's because it doesn't impact the play. But here, having that, I do really like that as flavoring, into the mix, of what I'm playing. I mean, why else would you play a Star Wars, flight sim, than to get, a little bit of your Star Wars in there. And when it is a little deeper like that, that almost feels lore-y, I still do really appreciate it because it does bring it in. It brings it into bear on what I'm doing and not in some kind of remote way that I have to care about things that are not really present in what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I feel like it was just enough as well, right? It didn't get too into the weeds, but it was, they mentioned the trap and they mentioned, we're tricking them by making them think that the Death Star 2 is not operational, but it actually is, and if you have any vague memory of the movie, generally you remember, right? I mean, Akbar's most famous line. Yeah. It's a trap, and then, they actually shoot the Death Star 2. I think they take out one of the cruisers, right, with it?
Yeah.
So, it's all... And then the cool thing about it, the other cool thing, and this is maybe getting a little bit too nuanced, but the way it ends, and kind of the final, debriefing that the commander talks about, you're the greatest... one of the two of the guys says you're one of the greatest pilots, and the Emperor... will live on and long live the Empire and all this stuff, and we're about to just trounce the rebels at this battle because the Emperor has this master plan that just is perfectly set up, and there's no way they can lose. And then that they lose,
right? Exactly.
And it's such an the foreshadowing of that, and you're playing the bad guys, helping the bad guys with this master plan, but then obviously you also know and want the rebels to win, even though you're playing as the bad guys, and then the fact that how it ends is a little Titanic in that way, where in a positive way, where you guys are saying this and long live the Empire, but your days are numbered because I know what happens.
Right. So, but at the same time, you get to have this success.
Yeah.
Of preserving the Emperor, and getting Zarin and having that, reversal.
Yeah, you still get. Yeah,
you still get all the payoffs that you would get from the completion of this story. I don't know what happens to our pilots. Maybe we go on and fight there at Endor, and maybe it doesn't. Maybe that's the end of our military careers.
Well, and I guess to your point, there's also a little bit of a what if to it as well, because you're seeing it from this perspective and this perspective of long live the Empire, and that you kind of, if you put yourself in the headspace of your pilot, you want the Empire to win, and there's a little bit of an alternate history of what if they would have won, and kind of knowing that in the film it kind of all comes down to a few people who make it all work, with the Endor mission, and then Luke doing what Luke does, and the Empire almost did win that battle if it weren't for a couple things.
Right.
So,
if it weren't for this family.
Yeah.
Damn
and
family.
Their friends.
Yeah.
Take the shields down and then anyway.
Minor note: Did you notice that the voice of the Emperor and Thrawn, I think, changed?
Yeah.
It's very noticeable. So I mean, one of the things that playing this as we did, and having forgotten that it's actually a game and 2 expansion packs that were made at different times. In fact, these last few missions might have even been 2 or 3 years later. I'm not really sure from the original game. But yeah, it was kind of off-putting to be saying that's a new Emperor and he's not as good. In fact, the voice work I don't think generally was as good in these few. The Thrawn was okay, but it was also clearly not the same Thrawn. I picked up on those things kind of right away. I was like, oh, that sounds different. That sounds bad. Unfortunate. I mean, sometimes you just can't get the people back, and the budget may not have been there, to be honest.
I bet you the budget on these 3 battles were pretty low, because they were they had the collector's edition.
Right, just a re-release, and little sweetener in there, but I don't think that they could justify, going and getting whoever. I don't know who the originals were.
One of the things I was bummed about is I don't think we ever saw Zarin, right? We heard him a couple times, but
Right.
he never actually, and he was set up in the original game, right? Like he's survived through both
Yes.
expansions.
Yeah, it was him and Harkov or whatever.
Yeah. But Harkov you see in one scene because I think he's
You see him twice. You see him get
taken out
choked.
by Vader. Yeah.
Yeah, being levitated by Vader. I guess you don't see him choked, and you see him meeting with Mon Mothma,
Yeah.
whatever her name is.
But Zarin being such a key, pivotal, traitor, and actually, for a military-based, mission-based game, pretty well done. I just kind of wanted to see more of him and hear more of him, and to kind of tell my mini anecdote for the ending for me. I also had to watch the final cutscene on YouTube because I didn't want to replay the mission. But what happened to me is I blew up the final ship, which I think was a Star Destroyer, and as soon as it blew up, it kicked me to the goals the goals screen.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have the hyperspace or anything, so I thought that was weird. And so then I hit spacebar because that's what it tells you to do it when you're in that, to continue, and then nothing happened. And I was like, did I crash? What happened? So I hit spacebar again, and what it was doing is probably loading up the final cinematic.
Oh, and you queued up a key press.
And I saw a frame of it. And I skipped it, and then it went directly to the debriefing, and I was like, God damn it.
Yeah.
And so what I realized when I watched it on YouTube afterwards, did you notice this? That was the only 3D pre-rendered cinematic that they had in all of the game.
Yes, that's true.
So
Yep.
I'm betting it was a much larger file, and I don't, loading it. I guess on my PC now there's no excuse because it's a powerful PC. But it's interesting that through the course of the development of this game, from the very beginning to this collector's edition, 3D pre-rendered cinematics came into vogue as well, or they were on the cusp of coming in. So during the history of this game, by the end, they went from 2D to 3D pre-rendered. And it's pretty rough 3D pre-rendered too. Like the humans are very, very stilted and everything's very simple. But you see that cloaked ship blowing up, and you see. But it's all pre-rendered 3D, and it's such a kind of a jarring difference because the one you saw right before that was the traditional old school 2D pixel.
It does look very different. Yeah, it's like
very, a different game. Yeah,
yeah, it does. It doesn't look like a part of the same thing at all. Okay,
this is a funny choice.
Yeah, it is. It was a weird choice. Maybe they didn't have access to the pixel artists. Who knows? Because you can imagine them doing the rest of the cutscenes just with kind of their Monkey Island style, full screen and parallax, that they could have just reused assets to do those cutscenes. Or
they wanted to end with something kind of modern feeling and cool for the people who,
possible. Yeah, possible. All right, well, let's take a quick break, and we'll come back and talk about takeaways.
Yeah.
We're back from the break. Now that we've wrapped up our playthrough of TIE Fighter, it's time to start talking takeaways, and pillars and stuff. What do you got? There's the one big obvious one, but you go ahead.
What big obvious one?
The big obvious one is deep simulation, right?
Oh yeah. We did talk a lot about that.
We did, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess we talked about probably that a little bit on each episode. Yeah, for me, this is the first we've hit. This is the first sim oriented game that we've played. Probably the only one we'll play for a while, I would guess. And for the year, all the different types of genres we've played, it is, there's similarities between a lot of the different ones we've played, with a couple exceptions. But we've had a lot of action-centric games that we've played, and there's common systems and mechanics that we can talk about. But with Sim, I don't know, I just feel a different flavor of things going on for me here, and some of this is nostalgia and my own background, but there's definitely something to be said for this genre and the simulation of albeit fake simulation of a fake thing, that I miss in modern day games today. And I mentioned this before, but it's definitely given me, as this podcast does every episode, gives me some desire to go and seek out like the Star Citizens or what have you, to kind of just see what the state of this thing really is about, because trying to go in and really, from a fantasy fulfillment standpoint as well as just the systemic standpoint, simulate flying through space with wingmen, side by side, and just the kind of try a little overstating it, but the majesty of it, just being in the middle of space and seeing those lasers flying in the distance, and a TIE fighter whizzing by, and the sound of that, just really, really well done. Even now, even though it's low res, I still get a lot of that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think for me, setting aside the sort of the simulation stuff, one of the things that I really appreciated and really paid attention to, in particular in these last few missions, just to sort of think through why it works, is the sort of the full commitment to the fantasy in all of it, in a lot of small ways, and I made a couple of notes, and this is just in the one screen. In the one screen, where you're getting a mission briefing, the one room. So, of course, you're already in the space that feels like a real place. So you go from the concourse and then into this battle thing where you can pick what battle you're going to be in, and then you actually go into the mission briefing room. And in that, mission briefing room, there's a few different things going on. When you click on the map, the guy immediately starts saying, this is what's going on here. So-and-so has hypered in and blah, and they just give you the rundown. Then you can click through the slides, and it feels like a presentation, a military presentation of this is what we're here to do.
Yeah.
Just like you've seen in war movies. If you then go, these are small, these are tiny little details, but my takeaway is that these tiny little details really reinforce the fiction. You have to mouse over to the Emperor guy. It doesn't do that for you automatically. It will automatically go to the exit door when you're done talking with him. And you have to click to make him talk to you. So there's this submissive aspect to the actions that you're taking. Like, oh, I have to go to you, and I have to click to get you to interact with me, which is not the same as the military guy. The military guy, he's just going to give you your orders, slam bam, as soon as you interact, it's like, here it is. But you go to the Emperor guy, and it's a little bit cagier. It's a couple more steps. And then it's like, off you go, be gone with you, and go do this thing I just told you to do.
Mm-hmm.
On the other end of it, in the debriefings, I also really love there's always a sense, if you've done some of the bonus missions, that he'll always say, instead of saying, thanks for finding that out, we didn't know that, he'll say, you've confirmed our suspicions, which is it's the same thing, right? It's, oh, thanks for scanning that ship, basically. But it's no, we're all powerful. We already knew that. We just needed confirmation.
Yeah.
Which is like a very fascist thing, right? Like all the power is concentrated at the top. And thanks for not even thanks, but you did that. It was your duty to do that, and you confirmed what we knew anyway.
Yeah.
You're not important, or you're not as important. So I found myself really, I spent a lot of time playing this game in the in-between stuff, just like listening to them talk, and give that delivery of, how you've served the Emperor or how you've served the military, and what you've done, And I think there are lots of little touches like that in the game that really highlight and reinforce what you're doing without really calling attention to themselves.
It's a great summary. I think in general, the full commitment of the structure and wrapper and just sort of like flow of the whole experience, because I think we talked about this in one of the episodes, but I don't remember if this was the first game to do that sort of presentation of menu as place, but right. It gets a lot of credit for that after the fact, where X-Wing and TIE Fighter like, you start in a concourse and it's all just a menu, but you feel like you're on a ship or you're in a base or something like that, and the full commitment to that. We didn't talk about they have a tech room that you can go to where you can look at the ships.
You can make films as well.
You can make films, which was also ahead of its time. And there's also the training simulation, right, where you can fly the ships, and they even have some mini game stuff in there. So it's actually a very fully featured game. There's a lot of different facets to it, and I didn't go into the tech room till I'd finished because I just wanted to refresh my memory. But you pull up a ship and you can spin around the 3D, and it has all these cool Star Wars stats about each of the ships, parsecs and all the sort of stuff that you want to see there, and it just kind of, again, it's there's a lovingly crafted aspect to this game where everyone involved was trying to really fulfill that, like you said, that kind of that full commitment to the fantasy fulfillment of it, and I think that's why I look back, and your first question you asked me when we started this series was about, what are the memorable, I forget the exact question, but what are the memorable Star Wars games? And this one, X-Wing and this one come to mind because they gave me something as a fan and as a gamer that I didn't know I was missing,
Right, yep.
And kind of went full tilt to it too. And so I don't know, it's a nice trip down memory lane in that regard.
Yeah, no, I for me too, and we already talked about how we, in our games that we made that were Star Wars, we went a different direction in terms of how the narrative is framed and all that stuff. So it is really fun to come back to a game like this that just does that stuff totally differently. It's really different from any other Star Wars games. I can't think of other Star Wars games that were like this.
No, and it's more.
I mean, I didn't play some of the, the Jedi power battles or the Masters of Teras or whatever. I didn't play some of those side titles, but I certainly played a lot of Star Wars stuff in my day.
Yeah, well, these games, the series in general. I think maybe I'd say Alliance gets a little bit more pulpy about things in the story and the presentation, but it's pretty much all of Totally Games. Their products show, like we talked about, a side of Star Wars in that simulation. Yes, there's some melodrama and pulp in the cinematics in this game, but when you're actually playing it, most of the time, it feels like they're really, even the scenes in the movie where you're in the cockpit with somebody like Luke or Biggs or something like that, there's still a melodrama to it, right? You're still watching a Western or you're watching a World War II movie, the way that George wanted you to. But in this game, you're actually playing the role of a pilot, and you're launching out of a bay, and you have to hyperspace or fly back to your ship. There's sort of logistics and mechanics of being a pilot. And then this is a segue to one of my other key takeaways, which I know I reference still to this day a lot, and I've heard other people who haven't even worked at LucasArts reference it as well, and it really comes down to the energy management as one example. The concept of having to deal with your systems for any craft or entity that you're playing as is this deeper sense, and this is obviously all throughout the simulation genre. But because this was Star Wars, and I think because it was a little more accessible, I think more people were exposed to this in this series than other series, like Falcon or something. Mm-hmm. But the concept that you actually have to worry about that stuff, and you're actually managing your shields, and you don't have to, but there are times when you really do have to. Your speed, and you have all these bars you're managing, and just kind of giving players that kind of simulation control over a fictional craft in space about a melodrama, but that management is another takeaway for me of just like that depth can work. I don't think we would go that far these days, but there's something cool about that if you're looking for it, because you just feel more ownership and agency over your ship.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's like we talked about, and you actually brought up again this time, is that even in moments that feel like dead time, you have opportunities to have agency, to dump those lasers into your shields because you're going to have time before you engage. And actually, playing this time, I paid attention to it a little bit more. When those TIE fighters are off far away, like TIE defenders or whatever are coming in, you can still target them and they're 15 clicks off. And you can see their shields increasing, so that they're doing the same things that you might be doing. Yeah. And the same thing with that slam that, of course, went over my head. It's the same thing, where here's an opportunity to, use the fullness of this simulation to your ends, right? And to make choices that you have to, I think you have to be really, obviously, I wasn't in it enough, I think, to notice them all. But I think they're there. And, I just really, I love that. When I see those, defenders flying around and I can see them doing power management, because their velocities change, like just matching speed with those guys, they're changing frequently, and, it's just the only thing that I think they don't get to do is the beam weapons, which, is probably good, right? That would be frustrating. But it's the one thing that they don't use against you that they probably could, because I'm sure that would be pretty awful feeling. Just like, I can't move and now I'm dead. Yeah, it would not be fun gameplay. It's fun to do it to somebody else though.
Yep. Another I guess medium to small takeaway that I wanted to mention, I wrote a note down that we haven't talked too much about. I'm trying to think throughout all of the other genres or games we've played. I guess, am I right in that other than maybe Hitman 2, this is the only game that has a mission structure in this traditional mission way? Am I misremembering?
Yeah. Well, that sort of is true of the RTS genre as well. Yeah,
well, I'm just meaning of the games we've played on the podcast so far.
Yeah, no, but we played Warcraft.
I see, yeah, with Warcraft, yeah. So I guess it does relate to Warcraft. But what I was going to say is, and this is speaking from mission design takeaways specifically, having been a mission designer myself, that the concept of taking, and we had a much more simplified version of this in the Starfighter games, but taking your craft and your loadout as a key main design variable when you're designing a mission, and then designing the flow of the mission around that key known. Because this isn't a game where you can go in and choose which craft you're going to play with.
Right.
You can choose your missiles, which does give you a little bit more meta in there, but you can't choose your craft, and so I think if you're not looking for it, you don't really notice, but the missions are very much designed around the craft you're taking, and they have to be balanced that way specifically, right? Because you actually take a wide range, I'd say more than the X-Wing, a wide range of power levels of the different craft in this game, because you play as TIE Fighter, which is the most minimalistic craft in existence in Star Wars. Then you go all the way up to these fictional crafts like the Defender and the Missile Boat and stuff. And there's a lot of design variability in between those.
Right. You wouldn't be able to take down, half a dozen capital ships flying around in a TIE fighter.
No. And in fact, I think Reed and Darren would tell the stories, because I believe there is a cheat where you can go and play any craft in any mission.
There is. I actually came across that. I think you have to name your
Yeah, I think it's a pilot name thing. I don't remember how to do it, but...
I read that it was bonus.
Yeah.
And I tried it, and it didn't open up the room it said it would open up, so I didn't look into it any further. I was like, okay, well, I don't have time for this.
Well, I just remember, I don't remember if it was like personal challenges in QA or something like that, but, the concept of like, oh no, I'm going to play every mission as a TIE fighter. And you can do it. It just takes a masterful pilot to do it, But I guess my point really is the takeaway of like
These are like the last Starfighter,
right. The ultimate challenge, right? And if we had achievements today for this kind of game, then that would be one, right? But I guess my takeaway really comes back to the concept of, and I will actually abstract it to not just your craft, but I'll just call it your loadout, or whatever you're entering, that kind of mission-based design and structure, and designing missions around the entity that you're going to be playing as. It's something we haven't talked about as a design constraint, but also a design advantage, because it gives you this starting point when you play, in shooters to some degree, right? You're going to start with certain weapons, and there's more minimalistic versions of that, or you may pick up weapons along the way. But this is a game where you're not picking things up along the way. You go in with this craft that is a known quantity. It's not going to change much, and everything is everything is built around that. And it's just a different way to design and to think about mission design that may not occur to people when you're playing, because if the game's designed and balanced well, you're not noticing any differences, right? It just feels right. Because even though you're super powerful in this mission and you're super weak in another mission, because if the balance is is bad, then you will notice. But this game, I think, generally was pretty well balanced around that.
It really fits the military mold as well, right? I mean, it ties totally into the theme. It's not like it's not like when they send some Army guy or a Navy man, I mean, probably a better fit, or an Air Force pilot. It's not like they go out and say, you know what, I'll take the P-38 today. Don't give me the N-51. I'm going to take that P-38. They don't have to make those choices.
They're giving them to you. That's very militaristic, and again, I don't think we're going to play.
But it is also a design thing. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong. It's totally a design constraint to say, hey, player, solve this puzzle with this set of pieces. Yeah.
And puzzle is a good word. I think we've used that word in the past episodes as well. And again, I think, QA would also talk about these missions in this way. There is a puzzle to it. And the other thing that kind of I mentioned really briefly in there is that when you combine the puzzle aspects and the mission structure with the craft that you're given and the balance of all that stuff, and then you combine that with the systems and mechanics and the depth that you get with all of the different knobs you have to tune, there ends up being, we wouldn't have called it this at the time, but now we call it the meta. There is this meta in there that if you are clever as a gamer, and because you have so much agency over your craft in this game, you're going to come up with interesting, weird things to do with everything in your way to kind of solve or to finish a mission that the designer may not have thought of.
Yeah, and that might actually be some of those edge cases that I ran into. I mean, certainly there was the missile boat one, or the gunship one rather, where I had no ion cannons available to me, and that I could feel the designer, aha. I told you a couple missions ago you need to take out warhead launchers, and I, at that moment, I went, oh, that's, I could feel that designer reaching across time to poke me in the chest and say, you didn't listen, and that comes from exactly those sorts of choices. I think, to know, like, oh, hey, I know you have this much information, and I know, exactly what you're flying. You're not. It's not like you can fly the interceptor or something there and have the ion cannon. You're stuck. And it's there in the mission briefing if you care to pay attention. Like, the gunboats are going to do this part. And as soon as I realized I was out of them, I was like, oh, what did I do wrong? And I had to think about it. Like, how am I going to solve this?
But I mean, like, we also talked about I think in a modern day context for accessibility purposes, ideally they're keeping track of that and telling you what's going on, right? In the case that you're talking about, you technically failed, but they didn't fail the mission for you, so
right.
You didn't know it. And
I just knew I couldn't succeed.
I
hadn't technically failed. I just had nothing I could do to succeed.
Yeah, but I think
that's a fine point. But
it is, but I don't know if that's forgivable these days, right? You need to.
Yeah, no. Today
it's a little hardcore.
Yeah, for sure. Who knows? Dark Souls and Bloodborne are bringing back a whole different kind of level of challenge, and we haven't really seen it a lot elsewhere yet. So I'm kind of, it feels like those are games that so influence designers.
Maybe.
But I actually don't feel like I've seen a game yet where I feel that influence that isn't one of those games,
Yeah. I just wonder if, basically if that were the case, and again, as I've already said, I've only played some of the first in Demon Souls, but I haven't played the rest of them, but so it's a blind spot for me, I admit. But it's the equivalent of saying, like, there's a boss in Demon Souls or Dark Souls that you can no longer win, you can no longer take out, but the game is not telling you that.
Right.
And I don't know, that feels like a bridge too far to me, and that not even they wouldn't do that. But maybe I'm wrong. Or maybe in their case, there's always a way. Even if you cheese it or do something crazy, there's always a way. And the point in this particular case is there's no way.
I feel like in those games there are.
Because in this case,
there is one boss I can think of in Demon Souls who is this blind character. He's a blind giant, and as I recall, you have to wear a special ring to be able to beat him that makes your feet silent, so that he can't hear where you are. Now, it's probably possible to beat him without that. So to your point, there's probably a way through.
But is it possible to lose that ring? Is what I'm saying. Like, can you throw that ring into a chasm and then?
You could probably sell it. Yeah, you could probably get rid of it and be unable to progress. You probably could.
And they wouldn't tell you.
And they wouldn't tell you, I don't think. Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember. It's not something I certainly tried. But when I figured that out, I was like, "Oh my God, he's blind, and if I wear this thing, then I have a chance, because what he was doing was figuring out where I was, based on sound. So it's interesting. It's possible that there's a way to break the game, but I certainly didn't try to. So
well, this was also the era of it was on the cusp, but we've talked about this in other series, but it was also on the cusp of being okay with starting missions over, starting levels over, right? Where it's like, oh, I've gotten to the point where I've kind of messed myself up so much, or I've failed in something that I'm just going to, the designer or the developers would say, well, you just have to start over, right? It's not that long of a mission, blah, 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 and I feel like that notion, other than these more punishing games you're talking about, is not as common anymore as well.
Yeah, no, that's very true. That's very true. All right, well, unless you've got something else, I think we'll conclude our discussion of TIE Fighter.
No, it was a good trip down memory lane.
It really was.
It definitely rekindled yet another genre. Well, there's on cue.
There they are. They're the pets.
There we go.
I just want to be part of it.
Yeah, it's rekindled. I miss this genre. I forgot, and I don't know if I'll jump back into XVT or something like that, but it's a really, they're gems. They really are, and I am personally happy that, and I hope Star Citizen does well, and Elite and those other games that are out there, because I hope it's a genre that's coming back.
Yeah. Yep. It would be cool to see a little bit more of that, or at least a little bit more mainstream.
I got a flight stick, so
so do I now.
How to use it?
Like 16 buttons on it, so it's ridiculous. I actually was finally figuring out some of the controls that I didn't even notice. I have a thumb button, so I've got a hat, and there's 4 buttons around the hat, and of course the trigger, and then on the side where your thumb naturally rests, there's a button, of course.
Yeah, I have that too. Yeah.
And that's all just at the top of the thing, and then there's 6 more on the base, and but if you press the button, I had bound it to nearest target or something like that, but it also would let you roll. So it was a button to but
That's
if you push forward and back, it also controlled the throttle.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
While you pressed it.
Yeah.
Oh,
it was
I wonder
amazing.
if that was messing itself up.
I couldn't figure out how that was happening.
Huh.
For the longest time, I was like, "What is going on?" Why? Sometimes when I roll, I slow down. Was literally what I was thinking. Like sometimes that happens. I don't know why. Some quirk of the simulation. I don't know. And then I finally figured out, playing these last few missions or battles, that was actually what was going on. So, we don't have any new feedback this week. So the only feedback we got was that we got email from Brian Taylor, friend of the show. We've read an email from him before that says, "Pay up, Brett." And I also heard it on Twitter that apparently the TIE Defender has made its way back to canon via the Star Wars Rebels show. So I owe you $1, Mortimer.
Jeez, I don't want Mortimer to stick by the way. But, I was telling Brett in the break, Dave Filoni, who's the showrunner for Clone Wars and for Rebels, is a huge Star Wars geek himself, and we got to hang out a few times while I was there, and this is my last run. Big fan of Republic Commando, by the way. That's why the Republic Commandos showed up on the
Clone Wars.
In the Clone Wars. Yeah. But he's also a big gamer, and the fact that he brought, obviously Thrawn was from the novels, but the Defender, I'm hoping, would be from his own kind of deep bench of Star Wars gaming lore to bring the Defender in. So I didn't know that.
Would have to be. Yeah, it was pointed out. Yeah, it is pretty funny. We also
now they can make a toy as well. So.
We also heard from Sean Duffy, who said at his title, "Aw, geez." He said, "Aw, geez, I've run out of Dev Game Club podcast to listen to this week already." Keep up the great work, guys. Yeah, so we did have a little bit of feedback, but it was all kind of short.
I almost replied to that with "aw, geez," but I stopped myself, so I do have some control over it, apparently.
You did say "geez" earlier, though, so...
Did I?
You didn't do the "aw." Yeah.
See, I don't even notice.
You don't? I know. Just part of who you are now. Part of who you are. So, it was when I called you Mortimer. You just did it like 2 minutes ago.
See, and then I don't even...
It was so funny last time when you were like, "Oh, I didn't even do it this episode. I didn't even say it once." I'm like, you did it at the beginning. It was so good.
Oh, boy.
Good times. All right, well, we are, so we're not going to start another game till after the new year. And we actually have already thought through what those are going to be, and we'll reveal that, I think, on the next episode. In the sort of between Christmas and New Year's, we are going to put out a little kind of a review. It's the end of the year. It's time to look back, and we're going to pick some favorite moments from the past year, from our interviews and our takeaways. We think those are the kind of big key elements that we're trying to bring to this. So we're not going to dig too deep into any individual game, but more just kind of pick out bits that we really loved ourselves, that we're happy with, and just those moments that made us as game developers go, "No way!" In some cases, or just deep cuts that we just didn't see coming, and that were part of the pure pleasure of doing the podcast. So look for that.
Yeah, can't wait. A little year in review.
Yeah, that'll be really fun, and we'll let you know at that point what we're playing next and where to play to. We may also still get an interview for TIE Fighter. We've been reaching out. We're still figuring that out. It's the end of the year, and it is just tough to get time with people, I think. So that's part of that. So, in the meantime, you'll be able to find me at Brett_Duville on Twitter, and him
at Tim Longo Jr.
And you can, of course, find the podcast at Dev Game Club. We are devgameclub at gmail.com for your feedback, or you can dig up the website at devgameclub.com. We, of course, love to hear your thoughts by email or read your reviews on from iTunes. It is great to have those. I am subscribed to like 12 countries around the world to get feedback if it comes in. And I do try to read each and every one of them. So thanks for those that have done that before. I'm to understand that is a great way to reach new listeners. So thanks so much. And for that, I guess I'll say good day, sir.
Good day.